First class protected cruisers. Possibly one of the most difficult positions and points on the inset to actually get right. And even if you get it right, the odds are no one will like you. In fact, the better you get it as a first class protected cruiser, the more balance you get it with the role, the less likely it is anyone will like you. Now, why am I saying this? Well, because as I've mentioned before, when we talk about the high-low mix, it's a nice catch-all. It's snappy, it rolls off the tongue, it sounds great. But as I've said before when talking about the high-low mix, it's really a lie. It is. It's a gross oversimplification more than a lie, perhaps. It's, you need the tippy top of the spear, and you need the lower level to provide the mass. However, these provide the mass in most of the world. But these don't provide the high in most of the world. There is a level in the middle, and they provide the high in most of the world and the mass in the critical part of the world. And that is a first class protected cruiser. Their role in trade protection terminology is, as I discussed before, you have the second class protected cruiser sitting with a convoy. Surface raider turns up. Convoy doth scatter. Second class protected cruiser puts up fight to hold off surface raider, to allow convoy to scatter. Convoy goes, way. And probably the surface raider, which is probably going to be bigger and more powerful than the second class protected cruiser, because let's be honest, most things are bigger and more powerful than a second class protected cruiser. Probably it will win. But when it does win, there is a problem for it. That problem is the first class protected cruiser. Because these are going to be the alert squad who are going to come out and try and catch you down. And there's probably going to be more than one of them. They're probably going to be hunting in a pack. And you're going to be damaged a little bit by the second class protected cruiser. Perhaps more, because remember, the Apollos have torpedoes and will use them quite merrily. And so they could cause, especially in days when you're talking in an era where you do not have the long-range directed fire. That's still being developed. That's still going to come about. And really there's lots of developments going on which are leading to it, but it's not there yet in the 1890s. It's not there yet. So actually you're going to be probably engaging in ranges which they might get a torpedo hit. They might get a golden BB. They might cause you some damage. And they might stay afloat just long enough to do so. And then these vessels are going to turn up. What is their role in the larger fleet? Well, in the larger fleet, they are there to protect the battleships, protect the armoured cruisers from any kind of dodgy manoeuvres you might pull. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because you have probably heard me talk about armoured cruisers before, and there are some the British build which are festooned with 6-inch guns. And I sit there and I go, this was not really sensible, because a 6-inch gun, as lovely it is not really an armoured cruiser's weapon. An armoured cruiser's role means that it's not going to be in a scenario where a 6-inch gun is enough firepower. Not for its primary armament. And ideally, it shouldn't be. But imagine a first-class protected cruiser as being kind of the equivalent of a town-class cruiser. I.e., for them, 6-inch firepower is enough. Because what are they doing? They're going to rain 6-inch shells on you. That's their purpose. To use their speed to rain it. And if they come into some fight with something which is bigger and tough enough to take them, they use their speed to get away from them. And that speed thing can be an interesting thing, because when you're doing trade protection, you might well think of speed in terms of what's their maximum speed of these vessels. Okay, so this vessel can catch that. But life is a little bit more complicated. Lovely example of a trade protection vessel, which is a powerful class. It's actually HMS Terrible, and that's the plan for them. Are what preceded Diadems. They have those 9.2-inch guns, fore and aft. Lovely. They carry 12 6-inch guns compared to what the Diadems will carry, which will be 16 6-inch guns. And they have 4 18-inch torpedo tubes, whereas the Diadems will have 2. They are powerful ships, as their name suggests. They're also very expensive, and you can only really build 2. I've discussed them before in a video. So the Diadems are meant to provide more mass, because remember, this is that difficult point where they have to be enough high quality technology to be the high capability in the wider world, but cheap enough that you can build them in to be the mass in the part of the world where you need the really high tech stuff. These don't cross that line. These are too much on the high techy. But what they do have is great performance when it comes to heavy and rough seas. This is the reason for this high and prominent bow structure and for this high hull. This is the reason they have this high freeboard. Everything is designed to make these ships capable of sailing a long ways around the world and through rough seas and keep their speed in rough seas. Because the dirty little secret about the ocean is if you want a storm, usually all you have to do is wait. More often than not, there's something. More often than not, there's something. And it's rare the ocean is calm and flat and nice. And again, it's returning to the age of sail. By the way, advice. Again, do not know how I did this, but whatever you do, don't end up snorting soil. Okay, if you're moving soil around your garden, do not end up with it falling off of you and going up your nose. It really itches weirdly. Anyway, leaving that to one side, hence I'm doing sort of this. Not picking my nose, but the bit at the front's itching. Sorry. Try not to do it. So, the Diadems. As said, they didn't really please anyone. They were controversial. They were complained about as having all the weaknesses of the powerful class with none of the benefits. They were considered problematic. And yet, we look at their armour. Their armour is actually slightly better in some cases than the powerful class. Their hoists carry protection. You have roughly, they're grouped into 2 sets, and roughly I say this because there is some interesting things about their engines and the horsepower they get out of them. I think it does depend to extent on forced draft. There's also the debate about the Belleville boilers, in that I'm fairly certain they use 30, because that seems to be what is generally agreed. However, some people reckon 28, which would be 7 per funnel, which wouldn't be unprecedented but would be weird, and others put 32, which would be 8 per funnel, and that would also be quite sensible. So, as said, we have it listed as 30. We have 2 triple expansion steam engines. So, driving 2 shafts with either 16,500 horsepower, or it seems to be that others, the ones which are ordered later, get 18,000 horsepower from the same make of boilers. So the boilers are improved, let's say, and can go for a top speed of 20.75 knots rather than 20.25 knots. Both groups can theoretically do roughly 2,000 nautical miles at 19 knots. That's on a bunker capacity of 1,900 tons. Why is that figure given? Now that's an interesting one. When I saw that figure, why is that important? And then I remembered exactly what we were talking about. These vessels were primarily for the purpose of trade protection and a trade interdiction, but they weren't from it the same way that the second class Apollos were. Pretty much, these ships were supposed to speed to where there was a problem, find the problem, and cause it to stop being a problem. They're your reaction force. And that's what this class is oriented around. They are roughly £100,000 per ship cheaper than the Powerfuls. What does this mean? Well, coming in at, I'll be talking about their weight, roughly 600,000. Roughly. And the others coming in at roughly 700,000. So I can build, if I'm building 8 of these, that costs me 4.8 million. For 4.8 million, if it's the 700,000 pound vessels, I can get 6 Powerfuls. And I've got 6 Powerfuls and a Diadem. Or I can get 8 Diadems. Diadem's a pretty good design. It's got a lot of armour. Go back over this list. Casemates and gun shields 4.5 inches thick. Hoists 2 inches wrap round. Decks between 4 and 2.5 inches. Conning tower 12 inches on the forward. 6 inches tube to the fore conning tower. 2 inches to the 2-inch tube to the aft conning tower. Armour's halvey nickel steel except for the armoured deck. Single, quick, 16 single, quick firing 6-inch guns. Let's have a look at where they're placed. So you've got a broadside, whether you like it or not, of 8 of the 6-inch guns. You've theoretically got a forward fire of 6 6-inch guns. Have we heard about 6 guns firing forward being important before? Six guns of the same caliber firing forward. It's not a thing called Dreadnought, which has 6 guns firing forward of the same caliber, provide ranging as it approaches something. And it's not at all based on a certain battle which takes place between the Austro-Hungarian Navy and the newly formed Italian Navy, is it? I have done a video about it, if you want to go and look. And why Tegenhoff was a very, very good admiral. And a lucky admiral, but a very good one as well. And why steam rams are silly things. Anyway. This is all a lot of 6-inch firepower, but why pick the 6 inches? And also, if you notice, you've got multiple compartments underneath as well. 18 along. 18 underwater compartments. Lengthwise. Everything's designed to be as survivable as possible. You can also see the armoured hoists. You can see the fact they have a double hoist for these twin casemates, the fore and the aft ones. So they have a special hoist system. You also have an advantage with these ships, because if you think about it from the perspective of rough seas, let's say in most seas you probably have access to the lower casemate. But if you have sea which is rough enough, so you want to wind in the guns and not fight from the lower casemate, you still have the upper casemate. And you have the guns aft, which are on the same level as the upper casemate. And then the forward guns are actually raised even higher. i.e., this ship is designed to be able to fire. And that's its important role. To be able to fire its guns. Ugh, would help if I pressed N rather than M. So why the 6-inch gun? Well, look at these gentlemen. Look at their guns. That's not because of the amount of time they spend in the gym. That's because a 6-inch gun is pretty much the biggest. You can still heft around everything using muscle. Now, you can do that for larger guns, but it's going to take a lot more people, and it's going to be a lot more difficult and a lot more dangerous. And when I say a lot more difficult and a lot more dangerous, I mean a lot more difficult and a lot more dangerous, especially as gun shells are getting larger, and guns are getting bigger. There is therefore a lot of advantages with a 6-inch gun if you're picking it for service in the Royal Navy. Advantage number 1. It requires a crew of 9 to service this gun. With bigger guns, requires more people, which requires more food, more space, more amenities to take care of them. 2. You can have a hoist, etc., and all these things to get the stuff up there, but you can also, if necessary, man-pack it and move it about by human power. That is useful, because when you're far away from home and you end up in issues, things will break, even if you're not actually fighting. If you're actually fighting, those things might be broken for you by other people. In which case, the redundancy of having humans being able to do the job makes life a lot easier. And finally, if you are going to standardize on one gun for everything, 6-inch is a fairly decent one to standardize on. Now, if I was an armoured cruiser, would I standardize on 6-inch? No. I'd probably try to standardize on 9-inch and deal with the consequences that come from it. But for a first-class protected cruiser, standardizing on 6-inch doesn't seem like a stupid idea. In fact, it seems quite a sensible idea. It's going to give you the required firepower you need for dealing with most of your threats. And if there is, as surface raider, something out there which is bigger than you, which there might be, the odds are your squadron, if you are out hunting, is going to be made up of 2 or 3 of you and an armoured cruiser. That's what the Royal Navy in this period would certainly like. And there is also the factor that in the late 1890s, the world of technology is changing fast. The Royal Navy knows this. But they still need ships to cover these roles. So you build these ships, you're building ships which have the capacity to be modified. They're not the fastest ships in the world. People wanted them to be faster. The first 4 ships were troubled by vibration, and actually the engine rooms of the last 4 were therefore rearranged, and this actual rearrangement led to the 1500 horsepower increase in power. All ships, and I have listed them with what they were designed speed and their aim for speed, all of the ships actually exceeded their aim for speed on trials. The first 4 vessels, 20.5 knots, rather than 20.25. The last 4, 21 knots. Honestly, when I look at them, and I look at the design especially, I do wonder if they had managed to create some sort of 6-inch turret, fore and aft. And this is really though before there are really many turrets going around. But there is a potential they could have designed something. Whether that would have silenced a lot of the critics, because they would have looked cooler. They'd have looked newer, rather than having a pair of gun shields. And by the way, this picture, it is a forward gun shield on a Diadem class. It's a cool picture. You will actually find it, I think, if you go to... Oh, what was it? No, not Niobe. Ah, yes. If you go to Ariadne, this picture is from around 1903. And as you can see, the breech is open. The sailors are holding the rammer, the projectile, and the propellant casings. Propellant casings, projectile, rammer, all the crew around her. And look at the guns on them. You want to get Navy fit, you lift 6-inch shells. All day, every day. You will get fit. Whether you want to or not. Interesting enough, Diadem. By the time of World War I, she'll be toting around 354 mines. Whew. That's a lot of... yeah. We're not going to be going that direction, are we? Nope. What passed through that? Diadem. And laid a small forest of mines. We're just gonna ignore this area. It no longer is passable water as far as we ships are concerned. It's land. Safer to think of it that way. So let's look at them. We have, and I have organized them in order of their being completed. Yeah. We have Diadem, Niobe, Andromeda, and Europa. Those are the first four. Thanks to Brassies, we have two sets of figures. We have the figures they provided in 1904 and 1905, and the figures they provided in 1906. Ever so slightly different. I'm not sure if they're correcting them for something, if they were told wrong figures, what happens, but ever so slightly different. Diadem was laid down in January 1896, launched in October 1896, and completed in July 1898. So that's a pretty quick build. Niobe and Andromeda were both laid down in 1895, the 16th and 2nd of December, respectively. And they completed December 1898 and September 1899. I'm not sure what happens with Andromeda here. She also takes a lot of money. Pembroke Dockyard seemed to be very loose with the funding. I'm not sure what happens. I don't know. But I would want to be checking those accounts. Because if we look at the most expensive one by far, that is also Pembroke Dockyard again, and that's Sparshade. It was £680,000. I'm just going to say that, seeing as those are the two most expensive, by a good distance, the next one down is Europa, which is £580,000. Let's be honest, it's near enough £590,000. That's quite a big difference in those periods of funding. If we're talking about in the 1890s, 11 grand is a hefty amount of money. 11 grand is a hefty amount of money. The actual average cost for the class on these figures works out at £592,923.38. Yeah, 38 pence. And the average cost for 1906 is £567,236 and pounds and 38 pence. Not sure why 38 pence keeps coming into it, but you know, what can we say? Life likes 38 pence. What I would say is, therefore, whilst Andromeda is not a massive outlier on the costing, Sparshate, 80 grand. 80, well, actually, let's be honest, 80, give or take, 87 grand more is a very interesting cost differential. A very interesting cost differential. All the rest are below. All the rest of the ships are actually below those figures, those averages, including Europa, which is sort of close to that, but yeah, all the other ships are below the averages. It's the Pembroke dockyards, Andromeda, and Sparshate, which are the ones which are busting the average. So, expensive ships in the case of those two vessels. And kind of unusual, because as a rule, well, if we look at the other shipyards, Pembroke dockyards are the two naval dockyards. They're the two naval shipyards. So one would expect them, without having a profit margin to deal with, to possibly be the cheaper class as ships. In this period, they were not. Decidedly not. Anyway, Diadem. She's a good-looking ship. Now, she was launched on 21st of October 1896, and her sponsor and christener was Lady Curry, who was wife of the Castle Line shipowner Sir Donald Curry. This is a very blatant thing by the Royal Navy. They are blatantly going, yeah, merchant class, people who own ship lines, these are the ships we're building to respond to any threats to you. Okay? This is what you're paying your taxes for. This is what you pay your finances for. This is what you pay us money for. This is what we will be sending out to deal with any problems that turn up for you. Okay? You might normally have a normal cruiser protecting you, a second class, you know, wandering around, but this is the alert squad. This is the reaction team. She served in the Eastern Division of the Channel Squadron under the command of Captain Harry Sewell Nibbett, and was docked at Chatham in January 1900 to make good any defects which they found during her first cruises. And of course, you always find something. It's one of the annoying things of life. You will always find something. You might not go looking for it, but you'll find it, whether you want to or not. In March 1901, she was one of two cruisers that was sent to escort Ophir, which was a ocean liner which had been commissioned as a royal yacht for the world tour of the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and York, of course, who become later King George and Queen Mary, from Spithead to Gibraltar. And then she escorts the royal yacht from St Vincent's to Halifax in Nova Scotia as well. Again, you've got to escort an ocean liner. It's a fairly good ship to have with it, escorting your royal yacht. And again, that's not a task which the Royal Navy is going to send a ship they view as being, how do I put this, not of use to do. It's going to get a good crew, and it's going to be a ship which they actually think can do the job. And it's worthwhile noting there are classes in history which are theoretically very prestigious, but never get given the task of escorting a royal yacht. Yet there are other classes which are contentious, like the Diadems, which decidedly do get the task of escorting the royal yacht. Definitely get a task of it. In January 1902, she was put out of commission due to defects which will take some time to remedy. That was the point made. And then probably it comes back to the vibrations and issues you had in the first 4 ships of the class. But it's interesting to note that the changes they made in those for next 4 ships did allow them 1,500 extra horsepower. That's useful. And a lot of fun. Because it shows the Navy is learning from what it's doing, and it shows they're studying it. She is paid off at Chatham, and then sent back to Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company for repairs to her hull and machinery. She's back at Sheerness by early December 1902, so she returns to the company to repair her. Again, amazing, you got the actual company who built the ship to repair the ship. She then sent to the China Station, and she became the flagship of the Vice Admiral in the China Station until 1907. Then returned home and was paid off in April 1907. She's then assigned to the Home Fleet from 1907 to 1912, and then transferred to 3rd Fleet and refitted in 1909. In 1914, she was being used as a stoker's training ship and placed in reserve in October 1915. She then returned to being a stoker's training ship in January 1918 and survived the war, World War I, to be sold to Thomas W. Ward of Morecambe for breaking up in May 1921. She was a useful ship. The thing is, when she would have been really useful is if a war had taken place probably in 1904, 1905, maybe to 1908, that sort of period, then these ships would have been really useful. But technology and time moved on, and new ships were coming in all the time, and this is a pace which it's sometimes difficult to understand these days, but ships are almost like modern computers in this period. If you think about it, I have just built a lovely new PC for myself. Thanks to your support, I've built a new PC, which is allowing me to really churn out a lot more videos. And I'm using that expression because there are a lot of videos coming. But the thing is, this PC is advanced, and I've built it quite good. Not tippy-top advanced, but fairly decent. Will probably be in a couple of years' time, maybe 3 or 4 years' time, considered old hat. It'll be considered, oh, well, you've got that. We've all got better than that now. Oh, we've got this, that. It's got no VR stuff built into it, nothing like that. Mainly because I don't really do VR stuff. It's a whole level beyond what I want to put in on the computer at the moment. I know I'm probably going to have to adapt to it at some point, but not yet. And the point is, it's the same with ships in this period. Sometimes some of the criticisms you read, the ship is 4 or 5 years old, and they're going, it's not got this, it's not got this, it's not got this, and I'm going, of course it hasn't. Those didn't exist 4 years ago when it was being designed, let alone 6 years ago when it's probably being put together and spec'd. It cannot have these things. But it's interesting to note, again, as always, it's the larger ships which are easier to adapt. It's another point I make whenever people are sort of saying you need to build a navy of small ships. That's a wonderful idea. That's certainly something which we should think about, because it allows, theoretically, you to spread your assets further and position them all around the place that you can do, and all sorts of things. All these are good things to do, but, and I say this with a lot of love and respect for it, whilst you can do that, those ships are maxed out from the get-go. Whatever you put in them is going to max them out, and therefore if you want to change them or adapt them to new technology, you're going to have to take stuff out. Because they're not going to have any spare space to add stuff on. They're just not. HMS Niobe. A good ship. A useful ship. She is in many ways the foundation of the modern Canadian Navy. Although she gets forgotten as well, as much she does get remembered. She was part of the Channel Squadron at the outbreak of the Boer War, sent to Gibraltar to escort troop transports, taking reinforcements to the Cape. In December 1899, Niobe and HMS Doris, an Eclipse-class protected cruiser, rescued troops from the Ismore, which had run aground. She then escorted more troops to Cape Town, and the Queen's South Africa Medal was actually awarded to the crew because of their services in the Boer War. In March 1901, she was the other cruiser picked to escort HMS Earth. Yes, the escort was Diadem and Niobe. 2 Diadem class other cruisers picked. I know, I held on to that one a little bit earlier. I just thought it'd be interesting to point out. The Royal Navy could pick any 2 cruisers from anywhere part of the Navy. They picked 2 Diadem class. Diadem and Affair. Well, Diadem and Niobe to escort Affair. Both times. She took part in the Fleet Review, held at Spithead in August 1902 for the coronation of Edward VII, and then was sent to visit Suda Bay, Crete, to take part in the combined manoeuvres of the Channel Mediterranean stations. From 1905 to 1909, she was the flagship of the Rear Admiral Reserve Squadron, and was refitted in 1908. In 1909, she's commissioned into the 4th Division of the Home Fleet at Devonport, but is paid off in September 1910. And it's at this point the Canadians start to enter her story. Now, when the Canadians start negotiating with the Navy, they wanted destroyers, but none of those were available. And they were given Niobe and Rainbow. For the cost of Niobe, they dropped the idea of buying a flotilla leader from their list of requests. Payment for Niobe was actually deferred until the vote on naval service in the Canadian House of Commons, and thus it's the Naval Service Act, which was opposed by the Conservative Party of Canada, and were pushing instead for Canada to make direct payments to support the Royal Navy. They thought it better for Canada to support the Royal Navy rather than create the Royal Canadian Navy, whereas the Liberal Party were pushing for their own Canadian Navy. The Liberal Party succeeded. Hence, she's transferred to the Canadian Navy on the 6th of September 1910. The edits to them, the alterations to Niobe and Rainbow included new heating systems to operate in colder waters, up-to-date galley, and the latest Marconi wireless systems. All were necessary for what they were about to be doing. Niobe reached Halifax on the 21st of October, timing her entry into the harbour to coincide with Trafalgar Day. I know, there's always a good little bit of theatre going on somewhere. Formal transfer of the ship took place on 12th of November 1910 once she'd been paid for. Yes, there's good theatre, but there's also waiting for the money. Niobe actually though managed to run aground off Cape Sable in July 1911 because she was to put on a training cruise. Damage control saved the ship, repairs took 6 months, completing in January 1912, and unfortunately though, her top speed is permanently reduced after this. The court-martial found that Charles White, who was a navigating officer, had not been on the bridge, and should have been present during the navigation area due to its difficulty. They also decided that Captain W.B. MacDonald, negligent for not ensuring his officers were performing their duties properly. I.e., we're in a difficult area. If the captain doesn't want to be up there, that's fine. Not necessarily, maybe necessarily in difficult navigation, although probably should have been up on the deck. and up on the bridge to help make decisions. And certainly the navigating officer should have been up there. But one of the problems that they found on that, and one of the things that comes through when you're reading documents, is that they had been working quite so much in other places that they were tired by the time they reached there. There are ways to manage these sorts of things. And MacDonald, I feel, should bear more of the blame than White, because at the end point, it's the captain who sets the tone for the ship. It's always the captain. The buck stops there. She was laid up for repair pending the arrival of new government, and so her condition basically continued to deteriorate. She effectively was rotting at her berth by 1913. First World War saw her being ordered to be brought up to an acceptable state of readiness for combat purposes. This, for some reason, proved difficult, as her crew had actually been sent to Eskimo to support Rainbow while she was laid up. And so the crew, to fill its crew, the Shearwater, Algerine, and a couple of other vessels actually, all lost personnel. They were actually paid off in Eskimo, British Columbia, and their crews were sent east to Niobe. She then travelled to the Dominion of Newfoundland to pick up 107 sailors from the Newfoundland Royal Naval Reserve. She therefore returns to operational status and is sent with HMS Lancaster to patrol the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And by September 1914, she escorted the Royal Canadian Regiment aboard Canada, the transport ship, to Bermuda, where they took up garrison duties. Unfortunately, unsurprisingly for a ship which has had the maintenance history of Niobe, on her return she develops defects and requires a week of repair. These defects prevented her from escorting the larger troop convoy carrying Canadian soldiers in October. In October 1914, the Royal Navy managed to get her back under their administration. And she's brought to the North American West Indies Station and joined into the 4th Cruiser Squadron. Immediately engaged in intercepting German ships along the American coast until July 1915. During this period, she actually chased the SS Prince Ethel Frederick into Newport News, Virginia. And after refueling, the Raiders captain decided that it was better to be interned by the Americans than fight Niobe. He felt that that was not a good chance of success for him. And if we consider, the Frederick Ethel is a lovely, lovely converted liner. It has a top speed of 15 knots, and it was armed with 4 105mm guns and 6 88mm guns, and 4 37mm quick-firing guns. Yeah, I think we can all accept that that captain did understand the reality that he was going to get massacred. Even in her reduced speed state, she could outpace him and outwhack him. And had the bonus of actually having armour. After this, in July 1915, she returns to Halifax, where her funnels were found to be rapidly deteriorating, her boilers were worn, her bulkheads were in poor shape, and so she's paid off to become a depot ship in Halifax. At which point, Sir Charles Edmund Kingsmill enters the area. He is the senior officer for the Canadian Navy. and he attempts to swap Niobe back for to the Royal Navy for a newer cruiser. The British look at him and go, well, we'll give you a Cressy class Sutlej, which was in a similar state of repair, and so there was no exchange. For some reason, the British were looking at him going, have you seen what you've done to the ship? We handed you a perfectly working vessel, and you've done this to it. Seriously, Canada. It's not the Canadian people who are at fault. It's the Canadian government who weren't maintaining her. Letting her sit rotting pierside. In December 1917, of course, the ammunition ship Mont Blanc was rammed by another vessel. This caused Mont Blanc to catch fire, and she was abandoned by her crew and left to drift through the harbour. She was laden with tons of explosives. Niobe was laid up in harbour at the time, and the alarm was raised aboard the ship once the danger was known. 6 men, plus Warrant Officer Albert Mattison, sailed to Mont Blanc in Niobe's pinnace, boarded the ammunition ship in an effort to scuttle her. A supreme act of bravery, because while they were boarding the ship, she actually exploded, killing the 7 men instantly. The explosion damaged Niobe's upper works and caused the deaths of 7 other crewmen. It dragged her from her moorings. This was despite the use of concrete to embed her anchor, and once resecured, additional anchors were actually put in place for her. She remained in use as a depot ship until disposed in 1920. She'd go on to be broken up in 1922 in Philadelphia. Albert Madison and those 6 sailors were very brave, because no one understood explosives and the risk of firing explosives better than any naval crew. So they knew exactly what they were going into, what they were facing. I love this ship. It has a career and a half in many regards. She was the 5th ship of her name to serve in the Royal Navy, and it's glad to know that the name will still be in use by navies well into the future. Laid down December 1895 by Pembroke Dockyard, she's going to be very expensive. We all know that Pembroke Dockyard ones are expensive. She was launched by Lady Schofield, wife of Sir Owen Schofield, Baronet, who had some very interesting connections with Parliament and with certain industries. Again, always useful to make the point. Upon completion, she is assigned to the Mediterranean Fleet under Captain John Burr. She did cruises of the Italian and Spanish ports to go and say hello in 1900, and she's taken over by Captain Francis Foley in March 1901. Then she tacked on and replaced, let's put it this way, Ophir keeps sailing around the world, and she either has Diadem and Niobe, or she has Andromeda, and you're going to get the picture in a second. And so Andromeda takes over part of the tour. In 1902, she comes under the command of Captain Christopher Craddock, of Coronel fame. And from June 1902, she served as flagship for Rear Admiral Sir Baldwin Wake Walker, who was commander of the cruiser division of the Mediterranean Fleet. In May 1902, as part of this, she visited Palermo, to meet up with King Victor Emmanuel and see the agriculture exhibition that was going on. Then she went to Gibraltar for a coronation fete. She wanders around doing all sorts of station duties. She returns home in December 1902, has about a year's refit, and then is assigned to the China Station in 1904. Doesn't return home till 1907, nearly 1908. At which point she's reduced to reserve at Chatham Dockyard. She's then transferred to Devonport Dockyard shortly afterwards, and in 1907, Lieutenant Quentin Crawford is authorised by the Admiralty to create an experimental radio station to broadcast to the fleet in Chatham. And he starts off using this. Well, this was sort of supposed to be a sort of wireless broadcast of music and speech for the purpose of entertainment in Britain and etc. But it pretty much they use Andromeda for doing this. Start off with, she's got good radio equipment. She's got the power supply. It's a good place to start off with. Andromeda was then assigned to the 9th Cruiser Squadron of the Reserve Fleet in 1912, and then she's converted into a boys' training ship. Now, in 1913, they decided they want to use the name for other things, so she's renamed Powerful 2. Then she's later renamed Impregnable 2, which doesn't to me sound like a good name, Impregnable 2. HMS Impregnable doesn't sound really like a great name to me, but HMS Impregnable II sounds like the first one was impregnable. Was pregnable. It just doesn't sound like a good thing to do. Anyway, as a name. Then she became HMS Defiance in 1931 when she became part of the torpedo school. She was finally sold for scrap in 1956 and was scrapped in Burt, Belgium. Luckily though, Andromeda continues as a name far into the future for warships of humanity. And therefore, if you would like to go learn more about this one, you will find her in the Glorious Heritage class videos. The Andromeda Ascendant, of course. What can I say? Settling for just being called Andromeda was never enough. Ah, Europa, Europa, Europa. Now, guess what she was escorting during part of her career? During the early years of her career, she served the Channel Squadron and the Mediterranean Fleet. And in 1900, she took the new crew to HMS Ramillies, which had recently become the flagship of the second-in-command Mediterranean Station. She returned from Malta with the paid-off crew of Ramillies in Portsmouth that year. And then she's ordered to take out reliefs to the Australian Station. In 1902, she gets a full refit, including new boilers. Always fun to have those. Then she's put into reserve, and then recommissioned in 1907, before being paid off in February 1910, but joining the 3rd Fleet in November 1911, and serving with them until the outbreak of war. She has an active career in World War I. She starts off with the 9th Cruiser Squadron, operating Atlantic, and was stationed off Cape Finisterre as flagship until June 1915. Then, she's sent off to operate off Mudros, and participates in the Dardanelles campaign, for which she receives a battle honour. She was flagship at Mudros, July 1915 to 1919, and paid off at Malta in March 1920. She was purchased by GF Bleto in September 1920 for conversion to an emigrant carrier. Unfortunately, she sank in a gale off Corsica in January 1921. Her wreck was raised and broken up in Genoa. She's a useful little ship. Not quite sure how much we call little, but she's a useful ship. Ah, Argonaut. you've always got to enjoy a ship called Argonaut. It sounds like it's going to go off and do interesting things. Now, whilst on the stocks under construction, fire broke out in the yard, and when the blaze spread, it engulfed the workshops and looked like it was going to burn Argonaut and also RMS Empress Queen. Luckily, though, Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company in Govan, where she was being built, had always had a policy of keeping the buildings as separate as they could from the ships. So when the buildings went up on fire, the ships were luckily safe. The moment she was commissioned in April 1900, she was sent off to the China Station, where she'd serve until 1904. Unfortunately, she served under the command of Captain George H. Cherry. Now, during his time in charge of her, he managed to issue somewhere in the region of 600, possibly slightly more, punishment warrants, which led her to her gaining reputation as a stern, the ship and the captain gaining reputations as being vessels of stern discipline. This actually led, though, to the ship's officers and some NCOs ordering medals to be struck by Gamages of London, those very, very special people who like to do, they did until 1972. They did all sorts of interesting things, and they were a department store that you could get all sorts of strange things done at, as rewards / mementos of their service under the captain. It read on one side, Argonaut, China, 1900 to 1904, and showing a foul anchor for the Royal Navy, of course, a fleece for Argonaut, of course, and a dragon for China. On the reverse is a cherry tree and a representation of the officers who survived the commission. They actually presented a cherry medal to King George VI. Unfortunately, many of the officers, who had obviously quite a strong sense of humour, were lost of ships sunk in the First World War. In 1906, she's refitted for special service and joins the Home Fleet. She's paid off in 1911, but recommissioned in February 1912, joining the Third Fleet. She's then paid off again in April 1914. She starts operating as part of the 9th Cruiser Squadron and in the Atlantic. And as well as part of this unit, Argonaut captured the merchant ship Gracia, a German merchant vessel. She was also at some point used as a mine layer, being able to carry 354 mines. In 1915, she's converted to a hospital ship at Portsmouth, and in 1918 to an accommodation ship. She's sold to Ward of Milford Haven in May 1920 and arrives there for breaking up in September 1921. She had a good career and was a useful ship. And freight. Okay, so she left Sheerness on 20th September 1901 to take out reliefs to the Mediterranean station. In fact, she was going to Malta with a new crew for the battleship HMS Illustrious, which had undergone a refit at the time in Malta, and to bring back invalids from the garrisons at Malta and Gibraltar. She arrived and dropped them back in October 1901. And then in November 1901, she's ordered to go to the China Station with new crews for the dispatch vessel HMS Serati, the draft steamer HMS Snipe, and generally turn up and show extra presence, arriving at Hong Kong on the 4th of January 1902. She arrived home in February 19... I think it's it might be February 1902, with crews from the China station, and then she paid off on 20th of March, but was recommissioned the following day for service on the China station. So she literally went out with crews, came back with crews, and then is sent out to the China station as well. So she leaves the China station on 6th of May 1902, bringing along with her crew for the steamer HMS Robin, which was stationed in Hong Kong, arrived in Bombay in June 1902, and then did a crew in the Persian Gulf, during which she made a long stop in Muscat. She was the largest warship at that time to have visited the Gulf, and so she drew interest and presence from her crews. She then stopped at Colombo in mid-July and Singapore in late July, and arrived at station headquarters at Hong Kong in the 1st of August. First World War, again, she's part of the 9th Cruiser Squadron. There seems to be a pattern going on here. Serving the Atlantic. In 1915, she's placed in reserve, but reactivated as a mine layer in 1917. She collided with the destroyer HMS Nessus in the North Sea in September 1918, which sunk the Nessus. This is unsurprising considering what destroyers were made of at this time. Mostly hopes, wishes, and fingers crossed. She was then assigned to the Nor Command and survived the war to be sold to Ward of Milford Haven to break up in 1920. A good ship. Adriani. Well, she's most known for her North Atlantic service because she went in 1902 to the North American West India stations, where she acted as flagship for the Vice Admiral Archibald L. Douglas when he took up command of the station. She had been commissioned in June 1902 by Captain Montague Browning, who was appointed flag captain. She arrived at station headquarters at Halifax in late July to succeed HMS Crescent, which was, of course, an Edgar-class vessel which had been holding the role. Between August and September 1902, she visits St. John's, Newfoundland, Quebec City, and Charleville. In November the same year, she then visited the Bermuda headquarters of the station and Trinidad. She took part and was a key component of the Venezuelan blockade during the Venezuelan crisis of 1902 to 1903. So this is another of the key vessels that Britain deploys there. Again, Britain is not going to be deploying incapable vessels there. And of course, as you've already seen, this is a picture of her gun crew from 1903. So that could well be taken during the Venezuelan crisis or not long after. A useful ship with a useful career. And then we have the most expensive Diadem class ever. The vessel which, quite literally, busts the curve. £592,923 38 pence is the average cost of a Diadem class. HMS Spartate came in at £680,188. Sorry. Both the Cornish and Scottish parts of my genetic history were coming out then. It was not good. I'm not spending the money. It's not me. Well, it is me, because I'm a taxpayer, but no, I wasn't a taxpayer then, so it was me. Okay, alright. So much extra money for the same ship. So much. Sorry, I'll stop. Ay, caramba. Now, her service history, basically, she was potentially going to go and become the flagship of the Australia station, but it didn't happen. And honestly, HMS Spartate doesn't get to do much. You'd think would get to do more, considering how much they'd spent on her, but she's used the Stoker's training ship from 1914. She's renamed Fishguard in 1915. In 1932, she's sold for scrap. She's not even, despite being most expensive, she's not even the fastest ship in the class. The fastest ship in the class was Argonaut, and, well, no. Actually, the fastest ship in the class was Ariadne, which was 21.5, okay, measured at 21.5 knots in trials. Also maxed out at 19,156 indicated horsepower. Not what she was rated or designed for, though. Poor Sparshade. Just doesn't get the love. Doesn't get the love, and doesn't really have the service that her cost would seem to suggest. For example, she's delivered at Portsmouth from Pembroke Dockyard in April 900, and in the following winter went on her trials. There was sand in the condensers, which led to friction in machinery, and her engines had to be reconstructed because of this. There were more trials the following year. These ended with the condenser tubes leaking so badly they had to be replaced with new ones before she could be ready. And a third attempt at trials was actually abandoned in 1902, and she finally completed her trials in July 1902 and was ready for sea in March 1903. Yeah. Not a lucky ship, the Sparshade. Not a lucky ship. Summary. So, we have one of HMCS Neobe's mascots there. Isn't he cute? And this is her being fixed in dock at some point when the Canadians actually were prepared to spend some money on her. Ay, caramba, that poor ship. So what are this class? Are they a failure? Are they a costly expense that shouldn't have been done? What are they? They're useful. As I said, they're in the middle, they're difficult. They don't have the argument going from, oh, well, they're cheap. You can't make the argument like you can with second-class protected cruisers. You know, of course they don't have that. You're not going to spend the money on putting that on one of them. You can hear that argument. These things, though, displace 11,000 tons. Amazing, that. I must remember, so to make a decent all-round cruiser, roughly, it's going to be roughly 11 to 12,000 tons for a decent all-round warship. Ooh. This is an interesting question coming in. So I don't know how so many tonnages turn up again and again. And again and again and again as one of the points on the scale. They have a problem. They are produced at a time of great change, and the trouble is, these are the Diadem class. Next vessels after them are the Cresses, which... are they much of an improvement? Well, they have some 9.2-inch guns again. They have 12 6-inch guns. They go back to the powerful arrangement of firepower. And in many ways, they also have the advantage of having turrets fore and aft, rather than shields for those guns. And then they're succeeded by the Drake class, which also have the 9.2-inch guns fore and aft. And those have 16 6-inch guns. So they now have the same number of 6-inch guns as the Diadems do, and they still have the 9.2-inch guns. And then those are succeeded by the Monmouth class, which have, oh, a lovely twin 6-inch gun turret, fore and aft. Those looking good. And those are succeeded by the Devonshire class, which, as I've said before, are a good case study of what... oh, I'm going honestly not going to build, honestly not testing out the Dreadnought design before I get to the Dreadnought design, and then there comes the Duke of Edinburgh as a class, which really do look like an early run-through of a dreadnought. And then you have the warrior class. And then it's the Minotaur class. So if you think about that, in the history of the Diadems, they start construction in 1896, and the last one of those is completed in 1903. The Cresseys start construction in 1898, and the last of them is actually built in the service in 1902. That's when they finished being built. The Drakes start in 1899, so not all these have actually ended service when the Drakes start. Monmouth also start in 1899. The Devonshire class, technically I know it's Spartite which is keeping up, but the Devonshire class start in 1902. And the Duke of Edinburgh's actually come out, Duke of Edinburgh's and the Warriors. So you have this entire next generation of ships being built and starting to be designed and come into service while these are being built into service. That's their problem. But those vessels which are coming after them are armoured cruisers. I sit there and go, well, what happens to the first class protected cruiser? Why does Britain build the Diadem class and then go, right, okay, we're going to go for an armoured cruiser? Simply because it's easier to justify the level of firepower you need for it to work. Having both a first class protected cruiser and an armoured cruiser for the British was problematic, because whilst the first class protected cruiser was theoretically cheaper than the armoured cruiser, there wasn't enough in it for Britain to justify having the logistical difficulty of having both types. They'd rather build a larger number of armoured cruisers. Now, the problem is that when you start mixing in your armoured cruisers and your first class protected cruisers in their role, eventually you end up with that beautiful thing known as the Monmouth class, with all those 6-inch guns. Because for the first class protected cruiser role, the 6-inch guns are fine. They do the job great. Because the whole point is, if they are facing something bigger and more powerful than a surface raider, you call on an armoured cruiser. So you're giving an armoured cruiser, a first class protected cruiser, armament. And that's where you get your trouble. So, in simple terms, the problem of the Battle of Coronel starts back with the decision that we need to combine the two. And then someone goes, well, as we combine the two, perhaps we can see if we can make it work so it's all 6-inch, because that'll be great, because the 6-inch gun is great. And that's the Diadem class. And that's another reason why their legacy is as complicated as it is, and why their people looking back at them are as viewed as they are, because again, they're an all 6-inch gun cruiser. But it makes sense. You wouldn't make a heavy cruiser in the you wouldn't make a heavy cruiser in the interwar period. You wouldn't call a 6-inch gun cruiser a heavy cruiser. You call it a light cruiser. And I know I've said an 8-inch gun cruiser really isn't a heavy cruiser, but bear with me. As far as treaties are concerned, they are the heavy cruiser. Large light cruiser more like it, but they're a heavy cruiser. You wouldn't build something that is going to be a heavy cruiser and give it a light cruiser armament. because it's not going to match in. It's not. And yes, shell technology and guns are up to the point at which 6-inch cruisers can, with enough shells, splatter an 8-inch cruiser, because an 8-inch cruiser really isn't a heavy cruiser. But the differential between an armoured cruiser and a first-class protected cruiser is enough that these are always at a weakness compared to it. It sits in the middle. And honestly, the British get round to an extent by also maximising their sloops. So they have the sloops as the lowest level, then they have the second-class protected cruisers. They have a few third-class sitting in between, but they're basically sloops. And then above that, they have some first-class protected cruisers, but they sort of get rid of them, and they start to go for the armoured cruisers to provide the numbers. And they just build more of them. They decide to get rid of that middle vessel, because balancing it is difficult. But the attraction of those 6-inch guns, and the utility of those 6-inch guns, again, when you're looking at this class, if we go back to the beginning, or any point in this, where you look at those 6-inch guns, and all of them that they have, these ships are very capable in protecting your capital ships from destroyers and smaller vessels coming and attacking them in high seas. They are going to clear a path, a swathe through any destroyer and destroyer leaders that you have to fight. Which is one of the reasons why the British are able to tell the Canadians, yeah, take Niobe instead of a flotilla leader. It can do the flotilla leading job for your destroyers, but it can also bushwhack any other flotilla leader and probably bushwhack any destroyer which they have to fight as well. Okay, it's not as fast as we necessarily wanted, but it's going to be better for dealing with the seas. Those 6-inch guns are attractive. And if you're not building a first-class protected cruiser to do that role, well, why not build one of your armoured cruiser classes? Because you're building so many of them, build that with the 6-inch guns. To fill in for the first-class protected cruisers that you're not building because you can't make enough of a differential without causing political fighting between them and your armoured cruisers. They're good ships. They're not great ships, but they do the job, and that's what they need them for. Right, so question, and I do have a question for this one. We've talked a lot in this series of 19th century cruisers about differences between armoured cruisers, first-class protected cruisers, second-class protected cruisers, third-class protected cruisers, and their roles. There are navies for which a first-class protected cruiser suits them better than an armoured cruiser, and there are navies for which an armoured cruiser suits them better than a first-class protected cruiser in the prime cruiser role. Based on what I've said and what I've discussed with them, I'd like to see what you think, because there are videos coming up which I can adapt if I think I haven't explained it that well, that I can try and explain it some more. So, which navies do you think are better served by first-class protected cruisers, and which ones do you think are better served by armoured cruisers? And also, while I'm here, thank you very much for watching. As I've said in several other videos this week, and I'm going to be boring about this, there is a small bet going on. It happens every Christmas. And the bet is between my mother and aunt over whether or not, and they're twins, and family betting is a fairly common thing. The prize on one side is baking a cake, the prize on the other side is some bath stuff. If I get to 10,000 subscribers, my mum gets the bath stuff, and hopefully we don't get this bet made again. So, because she's told me she won't. She's told me they won't. And the person who wins the bet gets to decide what the next bet is. buy Christmas bets. So if you do like the channel, no, not even, if you just would like to help my mum win the bet, please subscribe. Oh god, this feels weird. But no, every year it happens, and every year I go, oh. Oh well. Thank you very much for your support. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. This is what we've got coming up. We've got a live on Thursday, which is Patron 67. And ooh, we've also got coming up German heavy cruisers live on the whole Christmas series. Bum bum. Which is looking good. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and have a nice evening. Well, nice day. Nice time wherever you are.